Hi, guys. Now, the last chapter was very pleasant to give us a little bit of break from all the drama, but spoiler alert, there's going to be some drama in today's reading. So let's just get right into it. Chapter 11. At almost the same instant that Sarah was revealing her secret in her mother's home, a horseman rode up and dismounted at her own door. Dismounting, he slipped the bridle from his mare, freeing it for grazing along the grassy roadside. Then he went to the door and knocked briskly. Receiving no answer, he opened the door and went inside. He stood perfectly still just inside the room while his eyes traveled appraisingly over every inch, missing not the slightest detail. So, this was it, their love nest, the house he had found and rented before Will had arrived. She had transformed the ugly, empty-looking cabin into a home. The clean, scrubbed wood floor, the box-like windows, curtained. Nothing was the same except for the two things that belonged to him, his cot and his box containing his personal belongings. They were in their accustomed places. Then he noticed a wire strung the length of the room, just beneath the ceiling, on which was strung a heavy dark blue curtain that was drawn back to the far end and reached to within a few inches of the floor. When drawn, it could divide the room into two separate compartments. His eyes dwelt for a few painful seconds on the huge double bed with its hand-quilted blue and white pieced counterpane. Wrenching them away quickly, he swallowed unconsciously, trying to rid himself of the choking sensation in his throat. He recognized the blue table cover as one his mother had brought from England. The large, tall, hand-painted vase that had been wrapped in the cloth for safekeeping was now filled with a bouquet of wildflowers on the table. He turned away, his mouth working strangely, and stumbled toward the only thing that he felt still belonged to him, his cot. "Dang her! Oh, gosh dang them both!" he moaned. "All this should be mine and hers." He had no right at all. As he sank down on the narrow cot and buried his face in his hands, letting his hat fall unnoticed to the floor. Presently thinking, he heard a step outside. He roused himself and sat upright, bracing himself with a hand on either side pressed against the cot. "I shouldn't have come back," he spoke half aloud, his heart pounding at the thought of seeing her again. "But I had to see her again. Well, now I know, just by seeing this place, it has Sarah written all over it." There was no further sound. He relaxed, letting his shoulders sag forward, giving way to the weariness that possessed him. "Heck, I'm tired. I ought to get out of here. I've seen enough. Why torture myself by seeing them together?" But he made no effort to rise. Instead, he stretched both arms high above his head, bringing them down slowly and locking his hands at the base of his neck, at the same time swinging his legs up so that his feet extended a little beyond the end of the cot. He lay flat down, staring up at the low ceiling, waiting. Sarah came in quietly, unsuspectingly, 10 minutes later. She went directly to the table and deposited her treasures on it. Her head ached from the heavy braid. She reached up and pulled out the hairpins and let it fall down its length against her back. The man on the cot came to silent but alert attention. Noiselessly, he got to his feet and stood behind her, watching, his muscles twitching, flexing through his body like a strong undercurrent in a deep surface, smooth river. She picked up one of the tiny stockings and held it against her cheek. Then, suddenly, sensing the presence of another in the room, she wheeled about and faced Charles, whose face went a dead white when he saw what she held against her cheek. "Charles!" she gasped. As all the breath left her body, she leaned against the table for support. "Aren't you going to welcome me, sister?" he said in the strangest voice she had ever heard, as he came slowly toward her. "Of course, Charles," stretching out her hand toward him and trying to sound natural. He grasped her hand firmly and drew her swiftly toward him and into his arms before she knew what was happening. His heart felt as though it would burst from his body with its mad hammering. He strained her to him and kissed her hungrily, madly, as of a man dying of thirst. I had to see you. I had to know. Oh, Sarah, He choked, raising his face from hers at last. Never had he seen such anger as blazed from her eyes as she wrenched herself free. It was the very tonic he needed to revive his dying spirits. Something of his own sense of power over her returned. "How dare you?" she hissed, and her hand shot out and struck him across the cheek. "I'd rather have you angry than passive any day, lovebird," he laughed, rubbing his cheek that still stung from her blow, almost like the old Charles. He still held her other wrist. "Let me go!" She tried to wrench herself free, but he held her easily as his eyes fastened on the throbbing pulse at the hollow of her throat. He longed to put his lips to the spot and feel the flutter beneath his caress. He was conscious of the gentle perfume of her body, the heaving of her full rounded bosom so maddeningly close. Then, quite suddenly, he dropped her arm, and with a strange forced smile on his lips, he continued to watch as she glared defiantly back at him. Then she backed away from him toward the table, reaching behind her to deposit the stocking there. He came over and stood beside her, gazing down on the bolt of cloth and the baby stockings. Finally he spoke. "Does all this mean I am soon to be an uncle?" She looked up quickly, trying to read his expression in the dimming light. But a poker-like mask had settled over his features, though the skin along his lower jaw was drawn tight, and there was little color beneath the tan. She could not tell what was in his eyes, as they looked down at her from almost closed lids. She made a movement as if to escape, but his hand closed over her wrist like a vice. "Answer me," he demanded. "You can see for yourself," she flung back at him defiantly, at the same time drawing herself up proudly and meeting his eyes unwaveringly. "When were you married?" came the next query, like shots from a pistol. She closed her lips in a thin, firm line as his fingers bit deeper into the flesh of her wrist. "Answer me, dang you! What business is it of yours anyway, when we were married? I want to know, that's all. And you're going to tell me." "Well, there's no reason why you shouldn't know, though what good it'll do is more than I can see. We were married the last day of October. Now, are you satisfied?" "No, I'm not." "Did he join the church first?" "Why do you ask that?" "Because it was one of the demands you made of me." "Did he?" "He will." "Ah, so he didn't. And he hasn't yet." "He will, I tell you. He is studying the books now, and when he gets a full understanding of it, he will apply for baptism." "That will be never, my girl. Mark my words, he'll never join." As he spoke, he raised her hand, still gripped in his own, and looked at the 2 rings on her finger. "So, just as I told you, I see you're wearing my ring." With a mocking smile, dropping her hand as he spoke. "You wouldn't take it from me, but from him. That was different, wasn't it?" "Charles, please. I even offered to join the dang church if you'd marry me, remember?" "Hush," she whispered suddenly. "He's coming. Will is coming." He dropped her hand and strode over to the cot and sat down. It was almost dark in the cabin. He drew out his pipe, dropped on the cot, and took out his watch. A delicate, solid gold, small but exquisite. His most prized possession. He'd had it for years. It had been his father's. He leaned back toward the fading window light, straining to read the time. 7:15. He would not watch their greeting. He would not. But in spite of all he could do, his eyes dragged themselves toward the couple, locked, like a single figure in each other's arms. Her billowing skirt hid the legs of her companion, whose head, bending over hers, made them appear as one. For the space of several seconds, while their kiss lasted, there was silence. Then came the faint sound of splintering glass. She heard it. Will did not. "What was that?" she exclaimed. "I heard nothing, sweetheart. Aren't you a bit nervous? What's happened to upset you? Anything?" "Nothing. Only I thought I heard something break. We have company, Will. Who? Charles rose and came toward them. Just me, and I'm not company, he spoke easily. Before giving his hand to his brother, he stepped to the half-open door and threw something out into the night. It was the little watch. He had crushed it in his clenched fist as he watched their embrace. Will, gripping his brother's hand, exclaimed, "Welcome, welcome, Charles. We're so glad to see you. Sarah, this calls for a celebration. It's wonderful to see you." Inwardly he thought, "He's over it, and this proves it. Thank goodness. Perhaps he'll stay and settle down now." And out loud, "When did you arrive, and where have you been?" Sarah, watching them, was amazed at the self-control displayed by Charles. I wonder what he's up to now. He doesn't want Will to suspect how he really feels. I wish I knew what to do. Back east, mostly, but, well, everywhere, Charles answered as the two of them walked to the cot and sat down together. When did you get into town? Just before you came. Left my horse out to grass. See anything of her as you came in? Oh, yes, I did see an animal about a block north of here. Didn't dream it was yours, so didn't look very close. It's a bay mare with a saddle. Yes, that's the one I saw. Not doing any harm, just grazing." Sarah went to the stove and began to scrape the dead ashes with a stick. Will hastened toward her. "Let me do that while you light the lamp." "What shall I fix for supper?" she asked. "Besides bread and milk, I have some cheese and—" "I'd like a cup of good hot tea if you don't mind," said Charles, still seated on the cot. "All I have is green tea," she answered as she lighted the lamp and fitted the shiny glass chimney over the flame. They used the lamp and the precious kerosene to only burn on very special occasions. She turned the wick up very gradually until the lamp shed its maximum light to the four corners of the room. "We don't drink it unless one of us is ill, as a medicine." I wonder if he's asking for it just to annoy me, she thought. He knows our word of wisdom, but I mustn't start looking for things. "No green for me," grimaced Charles. "If I must have medicine, I'll take the real thing, but green tea, never." "Few Englishmen like green tea, sweetheart," put in Will. "I thought you knew." "I'm English, and I like it," she countered quickly. Both men laughed. Then Charles, turning to Will, "For heaven's sakes, man, don't tell me you've given up tea. I don't believe it," in genuine surprise. "Not altogether, but very nearly. As Sarah said, we use it only in time of sickness." "I'll bet you like it, especially when you know you shouldn't drink the stuff," tormented Charles. "Why is it," she thought, "that he delights in bringing out the worst in me? He wasn't always like that. Or was he?" "Stop teasing her, Charles," laughed Will. "Sarah's a good saint, and I'm trying to be. Times of sickness, heck, that's a good one. I'm sick for some this minute." Will turned to his wife. "How about it, Sarah? Do you think Mrs. Moore would lend us a bit for our guest?" "Of course. I'll go get some. You put on some fresh water, and I'll be back as soon as I can," she said, taking her shawl. She heard Charles's voice as she opened the door. "Finding much work around here?" She paused long enough to hear Will's answer. "Have done up until now, but we finished up tonight. That's what made me late getting home. I'm going to look Monday. Haven't any ideas, have you?" "That's really what I came to see you about. I've been offered a job helping put a big sawmill out at Soda Springs. They want men with teams. It'll take the rest of the summer. The pay is very good. You with your horse and I with mine could do it." Sarah waited to hear no more. "I knew it! I knew it!" she moaned to herself as she hurried forward, clutching her shawl under her chin. She almost ran the 2 blocks to the widow's home. She rapped on the door and then, without waiting for an answer, opened it and hurried inside. "Are you alone?" she whispered. "Yes, child. What is it?" "Mary Alice is having supper with your mother. Is anything wrong?" "Charles is here. He was there when I got home. He wants Will to go away with him, to work, away up to Soda Springs. They'll be gone all summer." She almost sobbed, covering her face with her shawl to hide her misery. "Is that all? By the look on your face, I thought the very least that had happened was that you and Will must have had a bad quarrel, or that he had beaten you," she laughed. "Don't you understand? They'll go away together for the whole summer and leave me here alone. Look here, Sarah. You're a woman with a husband, and you are expecting a child. That means you'll need all the income Will can make. To live at all comfortably, you must stop behaving like a spoiled child. Will must go where he can get work, steady work if possible. There's little work around here that is steady. You've had him every single day and night since he married you. But you know as well as I do, that can't go on forever. I don't want him to leave me, especially not with Charles. No wife wants her man to go away, but they go just the same, because they must, as in this case. Think of the months and weeks your own father had to leave his family, so he could provide for them. Yes, I know, and see what happened to him? Stop talking like that. He met with a dreadful accident. It could happen anywhere, at any time, with dangerous work as he was doing. Yes, I know. She was getting hold of herself, yet still apprehensive. I can't explain how I feel, but Charles is planning something just to punish me. I feel it, and I know it. He's like two people, different in every way toward me than to Will, as though he were determined to punish me for not marrying him and choosing Will in his place. Just what do you mean? I don't understand. Will trusts him completely, doesn't suspect a thing, and that's the way Charles wants it. When I'm alone with him, he shows his true colors. She hesitated. I wish I could make you understand. I feel this awful sensation of evil about this. Charles is a man seeking revenge. I feel it so strongly. He hasn't forgiven us. He never will. But Will thinks he has, and that everything is all right. She jerked the shawl from her shoulders and pushed in a lump for a cushion behind her back. Tonight, when I got home, there he was. He grabbed me and kissed me before I knew what was happening, not gently, but fiercely. He saw the baby stockings and guessed about the baby. It set him off. It seemed to make him madder than anything else. Then we heard Will coming, and he changed in a flash. You wouldn't believe it was the same man. They visited and chatted together as easily as if nothing had ever happened. Sarah, you're making too much of this whole affair. It's your condition. That's what it is. Things seem worse to you than they really are. They take on more importance than they really should. You'll laugh at this one day. Do you think so? I don't say that it's all imaginary. After all, see what he's lost? He's bound to feel bitter. Can't blame him for that. I feel sorry for the poor boy. Well, I don't, and he'd better not try anything to hurt Will, or I'll... Now, don't make idle threats, Sarah. That's not like you. I mean it. He won't be with you long. Try to make the best of it, and make him feel welcome for Will's sake. And for goodness sake, don't you dare turn into one of those whimpering, whining wives just because you're in the family way. I must be getting back. They'll wonder what's happened. Oh, yes. I came to borrow some black tea if you have any. It's for Charles. Of course. And a little would do you no harm after all that's happened. Oh, no thanks. I must hurry back, as she took the half-filled cup of dried tea leaves and started for the door. Thanks anyway, for everything. Will had the table set and the kettle boiling when she returned. Sorry I was so long. But Charles interrupted her. Quick trip, I'd say, and back with the bacon, too. Won't you two join me in a cup? Sarah tossed her shawl onto the foot of the bed without answering him. Think I will celebrate your return. It's a special occasion, said Will. Sarah, put in an extra spoonful for me, but better make 2 for Charles. He never takes less, I remember. It was such a small thing, but she felt a sense of irritation that Will had accepted his brother's invitation. But she said nothing. He's a bad influence, if nothing more. He'll be getting Will back to smoking, too. Confound him anyway, she thought. She couldn't swallow a mouthful of food, but the men ate heartily. Aren't you hungry, Sarah? Asked Will. Not very. I'll bet she had a cup with our mutual friend, right, Sarah? Said Charles. She flashed him a furious look, but did not answer. As they ate, Will told her of the job Charles had lined up. It's good pay. We need the money. I'll be back in plenty of time before the baby is born, with enough money for all our expenses. and some toward seeing us through the winter. She felt Charles watching her, like a cat playing with a mouse, she thought bitterly, determined to hide her true feelings if possible. Isn't there something closer to home you could find? Not that will last any length of time, nor pay as well. Then I will come with you and cook for you both. I would never take you to a lumber camp, even if you were well, my dearest. As it is, it's out of the question. She could feel Charles's eyes, but she could not help retorting. My condition has nothing to do with it. I'm as well as can be, and you know it, and I want to go with you. Please take me, Will, please. You'd think I had leprosy the way you talk. Charles touched the corners of his mouth with the tip of his tongue. His eyes glittered as they played over her expressive countenance. He was thoroughly enjoying the scene, secretly hoping she would antagonize his brother, perhaps even make him angry. But in that he was disappointed. Will was the soul of patience and understanding. Charles felt an arrow of jealousy that he himself lacked patience entirely. Will met her every plea with gentle understanding, yet refusing to be swayed. He knew what was best for her. Charles longed to see him angry with Sarah just once. Would she fight back or be crushed? He'd give a great deal to know. Finally, he pushed himself back from the table. If you two will excuse me, I'll go see what's happened to my horse. Might as well drop in and see our friend Agnes Moore and Mary Alice before it gets too late. May not have another chance if we get an early start in the morning. He saw the blood drain from Sarah's cheeks as he finished speaking, and her fingers dropped to the fork she was holding as it clattered to the floor. He swooped down and retrieved it, letting his fingers touch hers as he placed it on the table, at the same time making sure she saw the ring on his finger that matched hers Will had given her. He watched her catch her breath in startled dismay. She did not look up, only wondered what was in his mind and where all this would lead to in their lives. That may be a good idea, Will was saying. Sarah and I will catch up on our reading until you come back. Reading? Yes, I'm studying the church works with her. We read to each other almost every night. Look out, she'll make a Mormon of you yet. She almost did me. And he was gone. Sarah rose and began clearing the table. Her mind was in turmoil. Over and over came the question, why, oh why, did he have to come back? Her day had suddenly turned into night, or, like the eclipse of the sun, the light had faded away. She dared not tell Will her true feelings. She felt caught in a trap, helpless to escape. I can't tell Will, she thought miserably. It would cause more trouble than there already is. Will trusts him and loves him. How can I spoil all that? Sweetheart, you must not be unhappy because I must go away for a while. Will's voice broke in over her reverie. He had taken up the towel and was drying the dishes. Oh, Will, I can't bear to have you leave me. Nothing can ever really part us, my darling. You know that. Laying down the towel, he took her in his arms. Where I go, there you will be, in spirit. And where you are, there I will be also. Each will be alive in the other because of the child and because of our great love for each other. He bent and kissed her tenderly. He led her across the room, and they sat down side by side on the bed and continued. I have something to tell you, which I hope will make you very happy. I have made up my mind to apply for baptism. As we have read the Book of Mormon together and the Pearl of Great Price, I have a greater understanding of what it all means, and of the great goodness of God and the blessings He gives to those who believe in Him. I want to be sealed to you, so we can be together for all eternity. Oh, Will, she sobbed, throwing her arms about his neck as tears of joy and relief fell from her eyes. It all ties in beautifully, the Bible prophecy about the angel flying through the heavens and the mountain of the Lord's house being established in the tops of the mountains. Last night, after you were asleep, I knelt and prayed for wisdom which I lacked, and that warm feeling that it was all true entered my soul. As I thought about it at work today, I wanted to rush home and tell you. I was so happy. So now, dear Sarah, we shall soon be sealed. Soon as I come back, and they accept me." She clung to him silently, her heart too full for words. He held her hand in his, each filled with thoughts of the great joy that lay ahead. She felt rewarded 1,000 times for her patience and faith in waiting for him to do this on his own. "Oh, Will, Will," was all she could say. "Now you can let me go and get this job done with Charles, and, who knows, perhaps when we are alone, I can convert him too." "Go on, tell me more. I love for you to tell me how it all came about." He had actually quoted chapter and verse of each quotation. "How can you remember all those exact quotes and where to find them?" "I've studied the Bible for years. I guess because my mother read to us when we were small." He reached up to the shelf above their heads and took his well-worn leather-bound Bible from the shelf and thumbed through it as they sat there. Pointing out the quotes he had marked, she absorbed his every word, feeling once more safe in the world they now shared together. She told him of how, as a child of 7, she had known the prophet Joseph Smith. "I was just a little girl of 7, but I remember him as if it were yesterday, when Father was building the hoofs and horns for the oxen that held the baptismal font. I'd take his lunch to him, and he and the prophet would sit on the steps of the temple while he ate. Often he'd share some of his father's dessert, pie, cake, or whatever Mother had made. He'd take me on his knee and stroke my hair and say kind, wonderful things to me." There was a quick succession of raps on the door, and Charles entered, but Sarah's feeling of apprehension did not return. She smiled up at him calmly. Will stood up and looked at his watch. "After 11, he exclaimed. "Time we retired, or we won't be fit for tomorrow." He took hold of the curtain and drew it along the wire the length of the room. "Shall I leave the lamp for you, Charles?" "Put her out. I'm retiring now," letting himself down on his cot and tugging at his boots. The room melted into darkness as Will blew out the light, and the acrid smell of burned kerosene stung their nostrils. Charles slid noiselessly out of his clothes and crept under the covers. Though his body ached with fatigue, having ridden all day, he could not sleep. Through the undulating curtain, the murmur of their voices tormented his sensitive ear. He could hear no words, but the mental picture he drew of them locked in each other's embrace tormented him to near madness. In another corner of his mind, he visualized her the day he had rescued her from the river, the feel of her limp, set body in his arms as he carried her unconscious to the bank and worked to revive her. When at last his efforts were successful, he saw her eyelids quiver, then open slowly. There was a strange conviction within him that she was now his. He had saved her life. Someday she would belong to him. That was the beginning. His passion for her had grown and developed from that day on. And now here they were, under the same roof, but she was not his. Not in his arms. Worse, far worse. She was in the arms of another. Worse still, his own brother. He held his clenched fist to his mouth to smother the groan that caught in his throat. He realized that, content in her newfound joy, she had ceased to care for him at all. Their voices had ceased. It was past midnight. "She's asleep," he thought. Asleep in his arms. Never, never on God's earth will I spend another night under this roof, with the two of them there, as now. I can't take her from him, but by gosh, I will take him from her. They'll be separated for the rest of the summer. Anything can happen. Heck, what a mess. I'm tired, so dang tired. I'll make that job last. Maybe neither of us will ever come back." He slept at last. Next morning, as soon as breakfast was over, he excused himself. "I'll see to the horses," he mumbled, not able to summon sufficient mockery to cover his true emotions. He would not watch their farewell to each other. Now that the time had come for parting, Sarah's eyes seemed to add a last desperate plea not to be left alone. He held her in his arms gently, smoothing back her hair, as he bent and kissed her trembling lips. There were no tears, but the unspoken misery in her eyes was more eloquent than word. "Sweetheart, promise me not to be sad. Remember, when I come back, The first thing I do will be to get baptized. Just keep yourself well and pray for us both, and I'll do the same." "Yes, Will." Charles's impatient voice called to them from outside. "Coming, Will?" They came slowly to the door, arms about each other. They stepped outside. Charles glanced down at them from astride his horse, then looked quickly away, at the same time giving Will's horse a savage tug as she pawed the earth. "Goodbye, my dear." "Take me with you," she cried, unable to restrain herself any longer. "Don't leave me here alone." "Women!" hissed Charles. She did not catch the rest, but it was enough to sting her pride. She straightened herself and called in a clear, calm voice, "Goodbye, Will. I'll be waiting for you till you come back." Charles spurred his horse forward and for a brief instant bent toward the proud, straight figure on the step. His eyes blazed across her face with the intensity of an X-ray machine. She never forgot that look on his face as he seemed to be glaring into her naked soul and beheld its suffering. Not a word passed between them, but he knew that she knew what was in his heart. She watched until they were out of sight, then turned back and went into the cabin, leaving the door ajar. As she stood inside, "He's gone! He's gone! He's gone!" Like the tolling of a bell, the words drummed themselves in her mind and heart. And that's it for chapter 11. I don't want to give anything away, so all I will say is see you next week for chapter 12.